All right, welcome. Been a lot of articles, even NHL has thrown out that PK Subban is in talks with the Bruins about signing a contract or signing a paid tryout. My answer, will PK Subban become a Bruin? In short, is no. I don't want to keep you waiting if you're just looking for the answer. It would be shocking. And if it gets to that point, there's some systemic issues with the general. There are some systemic issues with the general manager position in Boston anyway. This would just further reinforce those to a point where, the little buy-in that you have from some of the Bruins fan base for Don Sweeney is gonna diminish even further. It's gonna erode rather quickly. So PK Subban, not friendly with Brad Marchand, who is the heart and soul of the Boston Bruins team. Not friendly with Jake DeBrusk. Had issues with Patrice Bergeron back when, late 2000s, early 2010s, when the Canadiens were decent. He was on the Canadiens. The Bruins were decent. They'd match up in the playoffs every few years, and that's a whole thing, right? So there's a lot of baggage that would need to be figured out before the season starts. Should PK Subban end up a Bruin for whatever reason? Again, this is not something that should even be entertained. Subban has been kind of brutal to watch the past few years in the NHL. There's a reason he's not signed. It's probably only like the Coyotes and like teams with cap space looking to flip him are probably offering him contracts. He probably wants to go to a competitor, win a Stanley Cup. He hasn't done that. Boston's one of the few teams that could squeeze in a little cap space, right, to sign him. So Subban, if he wants to go to a contender, is kind of out of options. But aside from the baggage and stuff, let's dive into it. So to start the season off, you have Charlie McAvoy and Matt Grzelcyk on the injury reserve. They'll start the season on the LTIR. Hopefully it'll save, cap space for the Bruins, which will be nice. Both of these guys are top 4 D-men, which, hurts. Both should be back before Christmas, so they'll be back at some point. But the Bruins already have 8 signed one-way contracts for defensive players. Excuse me. So starting off the season, you're likely to, and these lines could change, new coach, whatever. These are mostly off of cap friendly. I switched Zaboral in for Connor Carrick, but Lindholm, Carlo, probably first pairing. Riley Clifton played really well on the third pairing last year. They're probably a second pairing defense this year. Third pairing, I had Forbert and Zaboral. Zaboral and Connor Carrick may swap. Connor Carrick and Renouf. God, I don't know how to say his name, and I do apologize. I haven't looked it up. There is a whole atlas thing you can look it up, how to pronounce players' names. But these are both guys who have played NHL games, have NHL experience, and are depth defensemen at this point, right? So you have a top 6 already of one-way contracts. You can't waive any of these guys. They're probably gonna get claimed off of waivers if that happens by like the Coyotes or something, so they can flip the player, maybe retain salary and get an asset in exchange. It's free asset management for teams with cap space. You already have 2 depth defensemen. You have 2 guys coming back from the injury reserve at some point, a couple months into the season. You have plenty of NHL caliber defensemen on your team. You're one of the best defensive teams in the NHL last year. Partly because of your forwards, and yes, Marchand will also be out. He's one of the best defensive forwards or wingers in the game. You got Patrice Bergeron, you got Krejci coming back who can play defense. You got a slew of guys who also help on defense to make the defensive, stats and Bruins defense great. So you have that. You also have guys that you have Nick Wolf. Making a case, he might get called up at some point. He looked pretty good in the AHL last year. You have a guy who's played over in the DEL in Wiseman. He's looked decent. He hasn't played in North America, so we'll see what his stats bring with the AHL, but he could get called up later in the season. That might be one of those guys they need to develop and need to expose to the NHL. Again, we'll see. Don Sweeney's system is typically to keep signing players that have NHL experience on defense, and not there's really no room for new guys to move up and have an opportunity to play for the team. But Wolf and Wiseman could be wild cards. They could both not pan out, or they could, come into the Bruins organization and make an impact right away, and that would be great. But a guy that should be the seventh defenseman is Jack Ashan. He's a great young player. Does really well in the AHL. Has developed seemingly nicely so far. He just doesn't have the NHL experience. He hasn't had an opportunity to play in many NHL games. He's looked okay in some games, but that happens with young defensive players sometimes. Minnesota Wild with Kalen Addison, like he didn't look good last year, but he's a good player and he's been growing and developing exceptionally well at the AHL level to a point where he's at least earned a spot to be a seventh guy and rotate in and out of games at the NHL level. Ashan is the same way. He should be the seventh defensive guy, honestly. So you really have a bunch of guys who can fill the void. Like Carrick and Renouf, probably around the same level of play as a PK Subban would add to your team, with a lot less baggage. Hopefully, I don't know how these guys are in the locker room. I don't know how PK Subban is or will be. It's not my place to dictate whether he's going to be a nuisance or a leader. I don't know. But it's just a team that this is like the one team that it really shouldn't be a conversation with. Having PK Subban sign with you. It's also the team with the highest payroll for defensive players in the entire league. The only team that's kind of close, it's like $1 million less, is the Colorado Avalanche. But no other team is over $30 million. The Bruins have $31,925,000 spent on their defense already. You look at this, you still got a $3 million annual average value player playing on your third line. You get about a guy like Zboril, who just hasn't had an opportunity to prove himself that much, but looked great last year and should deserve a pay raise going into what was his contract expired 2 years from now. Right, so you're spending a lot of money on defense already. It hasn't really been an issue. It shouldn't really be. It'll hurt not having McAvoy and Grzelcyk in the lineup, obviously, but it shouldn't be bad. It shouldn't be awful. I still like this more than the Ottawa Senators defense at this point. The Senators defense will grow and develop and be great, but they're really young and they looked, at times a lot of those guys looked questionable last year. So I think to begin the season, this is decent. I don't know. I don't know where all this is coming from with Subban and the Bruins, but it's annoying. I kind of wish it would stop. Or I'd wish Sweeney would just come out and be like, yeah, we're pursuing Subban, or we're not pursuing him. I kind of wish Sweeney would be more transparent on that as well, especially considering the history and how much the Bruins fans really bevel in the history of the organization. It's not like we only look back like a year or two and oh, that's it. Oh yeah, I guess this guy was on our team at some point. It's not usually the case. So that's kind of my little rant, my little take. I'd be shocked if Subban became a Bruin. I would, and dude, it would just be disappointing and a bit heartbreaking if he did sign as a Bruins player. If the Bruins management signed him to a contract, that'd kind of be rough. There's a guy, not just myself, but Bruins fans in general, have seen, in a great Bruins-Canadiens rivalry. It's like it was during the late 2000s, early 2010s. He was essentially the player you would boo, right? He was a good instigator to the rivalry. Same with Marchand for the Canadiens, right? Just some villain on the other team that really sticks out. Subban was the villain. I'm sure if Marchand went to the Canadiens, you could have the same conversation we're having about Subban with the Bruins right now. So there's that. I don't get it. I don't know. It's just frustrating. I needed to kind of let it out. from no standpoint does it make sense to really have Subban on your team. Plenty of leadership, plenty of NHL ready defensemen, plenty of depth, plenty of guys that could potentially step in and maybe make an impact, or at the very least get NHL experience, much needed NHL experience. Sean, you got 2 top 4 defensemen that will come back, and then what do? You have 9 defensemen. No team has cap space. Who are you going to trade? You're going to trade Subban? You're probably not going to trade Subban, because every team's, most teams seem to have been passing on him for a minimum league contract, right? Otherwise, he'd probably be signed by now. Now he's looking at paid tryouts. So there's that. And then who do you trade? You trade your really 2 cheap defensemen who are young and actually played well last year. Both played well above their contracts last year. Hate on Clifton all you want. Great defensive player. He's really come a long way. Definitely not a top pairing defenseman. Fantastic on that third line. You got Riley, Forbert, 2 guys with $3 million contracts. Carlos, a bargain of a deal, $4.1 million. Grizzlick, high threes. Let's see, 3.6875. Yeah, no wonder I don't remember that. Is he the one to go? He was drafted by the Bruins organization. You just acquired Lindholm. You just signed Lindholm and McAvoy to 8-year contracts each. They're not going. You trade out a depth defenseman that really doesn't do much for your salary cap situation, or your 9 other defensemen if you have Subban in there. It just doesn't make sense. So that's my take. I'd be shocked if the Bruins signed PK Subban to any type of NHL contract, even if he has a professional tryout. I'd be shocked. This isn't a team that needs another defenseman at this point, even with the injuries. You're going to have an issue when Grizzlick and McAvoy come back. So I'm sure Zboril's going to play well, right? So does your healthy scratch become Forbert, who's like you have 2 of these guys have to be healthy scratches in a few months. Who are they? You have Forbert and Riley both make $3 million. You're gonna scratch $6 million a night on defense. Does Clifton, how does he do as a second line pairing defenseman? Does Zboril pick up where he left? There's not a whole lot of clarity moving forward with the current situation as it is, and adding another one-way contract is going to make that a lot more complicated and difficult to manage moving forward. So that's it. My answer is no. My hope is no. Let's hope for the best here. All right. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think. Would you be able to make PK Subban fit on this defensive core? Would it be a decent pickup? Do you have different opinions, different feelings? This is just discussions, like a YouTube channel. So there's no wrong opinions, essentially. It's fun to talk about, but in my heart, I really hope that this doesn't happen. But I also don't trust Sweeney, so there's that too. All right. Thank you guys. I appreciate you watching. Take care, all right?